A desperate family with a dying son had to travel across the country for treatment. Exhausting all options, they ended up calling Trump for help. And what happened next went completely viral. The only hope left for Andrew 10 was experimental treatment at Schneider Children's Hospital in New York. The problem was getting the sick 3-year-old there in the first place. The 10s lived on the opposite coast, and the journey for someone as ill as the little boy was practically impossible. It seemed like no one was willing to step up and help. For everyone but the 10s, the risks outweighed the gains. But this was their little boy, and they would stop at nothing to get him the help he needed. Harold and Judy 10 just wanted their son back. So as a last-ditch attempt to save him, they called the only man left that they could rely on. The 10s had been encouraged by friends and family to reach out to Donald Trump. In 1988, he was already a well-known figure, a real estate magnate who was bold, if not a little dramatic. He had a reputation for helping people who needed it the most, and the 10s were out of options. Their fear over what might happen to Andrew drove them to make a desperate plea. Their son was dying, so they called Trump for help. At the back of their minds, they doubted that the larger-than-life property tycoon would even respond to them. After all, why would he? But they got a huge shock. Without hesitation, Donald Trump responded and agreed to send his private Boeing 727-27 to Los Angeles to transport Andrew to New York. For the 10s, this act of kindness was nothing short of a miracle, the chance that their son needed to survive. With his jet prepared and ready to go, Trump arranged for a crew to be on standby to accommodate the special needs of the child. The act of kindness from one of the most polarizing figures in modern history became lost over time, remembered only by the 10s for the huge impact it had on their lives. Trump never used the story for political gain, and therefore hardly anyone knew about it for many years. In 1988, there was no social media, but when the story re-emerged almost 30 years later, everyone was keen to know what had happened, and this incredible rescue tale went completely viral. News archives were explored to piece together the lives of Andrew and his parents and how Donald Trump had come to their rescue 30 years ago. The 10s were a devout Jewish family from Los Angeles, and they were facing a nightmare no parent should ever have to go through. Their 3-year-old son, Andrew, had been suffering from a rare and undiagnosed breathing condition. Andrew had been a healthy baby at birth, but everything changed when he was just 10 months old. Without warning, he stopped breathing, and the incident left his parents, Harold and Judy, in shock and terror, never knowing when or if it would happen again. The doctors were just as baffled by what was going on and couldn't give the family any answers. Although they managed to revive him, they could not determine the cause of his sudden shortness of breath, meaning at any moment the family could be subjected to the same ordeal again. Andrew's condition deteriorated rapidly. Their once happy baby was a shadow of his former self, weak and tired. 6 months after the first incident, it happened again. This time it was worse. Andrew's ability to breathe independently was compromised, and his health continued to decline. As a result of his illness, Andrew could no longer swallow and had to be fed through a tube. He lost his gag reflex and his ability to cry, and he slept with an apnea alarm to alert the nurses who monitored him around the clock. The 10s' lives became a constant battle for their son's survival. Everything that a child his age should have been doing was now no longer possible. Andrew couldn't even laugh with his parents or tell them he loved them. He spent all day hooked up to machines just to ensure he stayed alive. Medical experts across Los Angeles were at a loss. The 10s consulted numerous doctors and specialists, but Andrew's condition remained a mystery. The family felt like they had exhausted all resources and still didn't have answers. Despite their best efforts, no one could explain why their son was slowly slipping away. It seemed like the only option left was to try and make the most of the remaining time they had with Andrew. But what parent can give up on their child and accept that they're dying? The Tens certainly couldn't, so they expanded their search in an attempt to find someone who might have the answers they needed. That was when they got in contact with the Schneider Children's Hospital of Long Island Jewish Medical Center in New York. The hospital had been trying an experimental treatment that could potentially save Andrew's life, and they were willing to take him as a patient. It was the news that Harold and Judy had been waiting to hear, but their relief was short-lived as there was a huge obstacle in the way how to transport Andrew from LA to New York. There were nearly 3,000 miles between the two states, and Andrew had to travel with several pieces of medical equipment, including a portable oxygen tank and a suction machine. He also needed nurses to tend to him and make sure the equipment was working correctly. Riding the high of finally being offered help and treatment, the Tens began calling around airlines, ready to book a flight to New York. But every commercial airline they contacted gave them the same answer: it was too much of a risk for the airline to take to transport the dying boy. The heartache the Tens felt was indescribable. Their last chance to save their son had been cruelly snatched away from them. Time was running out now, and Andrew was getting worse each day. Harold and Judy were desperate for someone to just give them a break. That was when they reached out to Donald Trump for help, and finally found someone willing to save their son. Trump's private jet would transport Andrew to New York. When the jet landed in Los Angeles, the crew immediately began the difficult process of preparing Andrew for the flight. It was a tangle of medical equipment and caregivers, all making sure that the young boy was safe and comfortable for the flight. It would be the longest 5 hours of Harold and Judy's lives as they hoped everything went smoothly. The private jet, with its luxurious interior, had been transformed into a safe space for the frail child. Its plush seats contrasted with the medical equipment, and the hum of the engines mixed with the beeping of monitors. It still didn't feel real to Harold and Judy. Their son finally had a chance at life. They sat anxiously by their son's side during the flight, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and hope. If their boy made it to New York, there was help on offer there that could drastically improve all of their lives. This was all they'd ever wanted since that first awful incident of Andrew stopping breathing. Everywhere they'd turned for the past few years, they'd been met with shaking heads and shrugging shoulders, sorry glances from doctors and nurses when they couldn't answer questions, and rejections from airlines not wanting the burden of transporting such a sick child. Only one person had stepped in to help without asking any questions and wanting nothing in return. What Trump had done for them, they'd never be able to thank him enough for. The plane landed at LaGuardia Airport, where a medical team was waiting to rush Andrew to Schneider Children's Hospital. As the boy was carefully moved from the plane to the ambulance, his grandparents, who had flown out to meet them, stood by with tears in their eyes. The sight of their grandson, so fragile and yet so full of fight, was almost too much to bear. They knew that every second counted. The whole family was rallying around Andrew, confident that they would finally see a breakthrough. Andrew's arrival at Schneider marked the beginning of a new chapter in his fight for life. It was the first time throughout this ordeal that his parents dared to think about the future and what their son's life might look like. They'd spent so long living hour to hour, not knowing what was around the corner, that they were only now realizing how truly exhausted they were. They'd clung to the only things they had: their faith and their love for each other to get them through an awful few years, often feeling like they were alone in the world. Now it felt like the staff at Schneider had stepped in to be their teammates, to ease some of the burden and hopefully make things better. The treatment Andrew received in New York provided him with temporary relief, and for a while it seemed as though a miracle might be possible. The Tens watched as their son, though still gravely ill, showed small signs of improvement. He was better than he had been in a long time, and Harold and Judy couldn't quite believe it. All the struggle to get him here had been worth it. They held on to the belief that with time he might overcome the odds, especially with the excellent care he was receiving. Life went on this way for many years, and just as they'd settled into a routine where they didn't feel like they had to dread every passing hour, the worst thing imaginable happened. Despite the best efforts of the medical team and the unwavering love of his family, Andrew's condition did not improve anywhere near as much as doctors had hoped. After 10 years of battling his illness, Andrew passed away. His death was a devastating blow to his family, who had fought so hard to keep him alive, but they were determined to find a way to honor his memory. In tribute to their son, Harold and Judy sponsored Camp Abraham Musher, a summer camp for Jewish teens and young adults with special needs located in Los Angeles. The camp was named after Andrew's Hebrew name and was dedicated to providing a safe and fun environment for children facing their own challenges. Camp Abraham Musher offered a variety of activities, from swimming and horseback riding to arts and crafts, all within a supportive and nurturing Jewish setting. It was just the kind of place that Harold and Judy wished their son could have gone to. The Tens never forgot the kindness shown to them by Donald Trump. They believed that he had fulfilled the Talmudic saying that he who saves one person's life is as if he saved the entire world. In their eyes, Trump's actions were those of a man who understood the pain of a parent facing the loss of a child. It had been a human response to a terrible situation, something that everyone else they'd turned to had failed to give. He'd stepped up, no questions asked, when others had flat out denied them help. Though Andrew ultimately lost his battle, the Tens knew that Trump's intervention had given them precious years with their son that they wouldn't have had without taking him to New York for treatment. For decades, this story of quiet generosity remained largely unknown. It had made some small headlines at the time, but was mainly only remembered by those directly involved. Trump, who often basked in the limelight, rarely spoke of the incident. He'd promised to help the family without wanting anything in return, as their pain wasn't his to use for political gain. The story made a brief appearance in his 2000 book, The America We Deserve, but it quickly slipped back into obscurity until Trump decided to run for president in 2015. Nearly 3 decades later, the story resurfaced. Media outlets, keen to report on anything they could find about the presidential candidate, began reprinting an old article from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency recounting the events of 1988, without clarifying that they had occurred so long ago. The story quickly went viral, with readers across the world sharing and commenting on this tale of unexpected kindness. Some were surprised that Trump, known for his brashness and often controversial statements, had quietly performed such a selfless act. Others saw it as a reminder that even the most polarizing figures are compassionate and have a heart. It was only when it was made clear that these events had actually taken place almost 30 years earlier that the story went completely viral, with many praising Trump for not relying on the act of kindness to win over voters. As the story spread, it reignited a discussion about the nature of Trump's character. People from all walks of life began to debate what this episode revealed about the man who would eventually become the 45th President of the United States. It also brought to light the way the media reported on events, highlighting how easy it can be to twist the truth. Many had been led to believe that the story had taken place recently, and had been quick to bash Trump for only offering his plane because he was hoping to become the president. When they realized this wasn't the case, some people began to question how reliable the media actually is. For the Tens, the story was never about politics or public perception. After all, Trump was far from running for president in 1988 when they turned to him for help. It was about a moment when a man with the means to help chose to do so without hesitation. To them, Donald Trump would always be the man who answered their call when they were at their most desperate, something they'd always be thankful for, regardless of his political statements. The story coming to light again was heartbreaking for the family, serving as a reminder of how long it had been since Andrew passed away. But it was also a chance for people to know his story, a way for his legacy to live on a little longer. The Tens had seen a different side to Trump than what is often presented to the public, and through Andrew's story, the whole world was now getting to see this generous, softer side of the man who hoped to be president. Now it's over to you. What do you think of this story? Do you know any other quiet acts of kindness carried out by famous people? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next video.